one of my guys looks at me and he says, "Wait a minute, is that water in the corner of your eye? Are you going to cry?" But then he says, "Are you human after all?" I looked at him, I said, "You don't think I'm fucking human? I don't think there's anything more important for us to talk about than that." And that's when we became a team. And to this day, I believe those guys would follow me anywhere.
What's up, everyone? This is Justin Kahn. Welcome to my podcast, The Quest, where I dive into the ups and downs of trailblazers around me to help you figure out life and get to where you want to be. As always, smash subscribe and ring that bell for unfiltered conversations about tech, wellness, entertainment, living life, and much more. Our topic today is leadership. Carole is one of my leadership coaches and previously ran the Touchy Feely program at Stanford. Listen to this episode as Carole reveals the secrets behind connecting with the people around you in a much more meaningful way. The things I've learned from Carole have changed my life, and I hope you learn the same things. Carole, it's so good to see you and have you here. Thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Likewise, I'm thrilled.
I want to cover everything, all of lit and my experience with it and T groups, tell people about all of that. But I want to start off with how you came to this work and how you became an educator, because that was a hard pivot from you were a business executive beforehand. So can you tell me a little bit about how you got started here?
Good. Happy to start wherever. So yes, it's a long, circuitous story. I've had, I don't know, 6 careers, depending on how we count. And only my latest has been as an educator. But it's been the longest. So I've been an educator for probably 20 years. And when I really think about it, I think I was always an educator. I just showed up in different settings. I think one of the things that frankly made me a good leader and a good manager way back when I was running a sales and marketing organization in industrial automation was that I loved helping others reach their potential. And but how I ended up at Stanford, which was kind of the beginning of my more formal education career, is that well, I don't know how far back to start, but you can always edit out the part that's less interesting. So when my husband and I got married, we made a deal that we were both at the same point in our careers. We were both on the rise, junior executives in the Valley, and we wanted to have kids, and we wanted to be very involved in the raising of our kids. So we made a deal that what we would do is we would take turns being home, being the primary caregiver and the primary home maker, rather than try to do both of us doing everything, which is what most of our peers were doing. So what we did was we decided it made more sense for me to start out being the person at home. This was obviously after we made the deal before we got married, but then after we got married and decided it was time to have a baby, then we decided that I would be the first person to kind of pause the career and stay home, and then I would stay home until our youngest child was well established in elementary school, and then we would switch places, and he would come home and take the kids, the rest of the way, and then once they went off to college, we'd figure out what we were each going to do after that, and we called that our life plan.
So that was you got the hard part, because that was now that I have a kid, I'm like, the first couple of years, that's the hardest part.
Yeah, wait till you have them, wait till they get older. It's hard in different ways. So it made the most sense from a perfectly practical point of view that I stay home first. I mean, I was the one with the breasts. So that made the most sense. It however turned out to be a stroke of genius that neither of us had any idea we were having, which is that when they're really little, you have to manage their lives. And I'm really good at that. And when they get older and they become teenagers, then you have to learn how to counsel and be a coach, a a facilitator, the way in which you're a consultant. You become their consultant. And when we made the swap, uh, it became really obvious that the way Andy parented was much better suited for them as teenagers, or sort of early teen and through
Ah,
teens. And I was, now we made the switch later than we'd originally anticipated, which is part of the answer to your story about how did I get into education. I had always thought when we made the deal that I would go back to sales and marketing and industrial automation. It's what I had done before. I had been successful. I had made a lot of, I had a lot of contacts and networks. I figured that's what I do. But what happened was when I was home with them and they were little and they got old enough that I could do something other than just be with them 24/7, but wasn't yet ready to switch entirely, I realized I didn't want to go back to industrial automation sales and marketing. It was sort of like I'd been there and done that and I'd done the corporate thing, and it just was holding less and less interest for me. And I got involved in local nonprofit um, community organizations. I ended up on the board of a couple of organizations, including Leadership Palo Alto. And I got really intrigued with this whole idea of leadership development. And uh, a fellow who I was on the board with, Tim Stanton from the Stanford School, he was at Haas, which was Stanford, one of the schools at Stanford, said to me,
it's Berkeley School.
yeah, except it was the Haas Center at Stanford. So there's,
Okay, yes.
Uh, uh, but I said to him one day, we were talking and we developed this really cool program for Leadership Palo Alto. And I said, I really like this stuff. I think I want to do this when it's my turn to support us. And he said, well, this is actually called organization development. It's a whole field. I was like, really? No kidding. And then I decided, well, I don't know. If I'm going to go back and do this, maybe I should get a little more education. I was halfway through a master's in chemistry when I decided that I didn't want to be a chemist. So, if we go all the way back there, I didn't have enough credits to graduate, but I had more than enough credits for bachelor's in chemistry at the time because I was in a 4-year bachelor master's program. And so I went to the business school at Northwestern and said, hey, can I just take some business classes to kind of make up the rest of the credits that I need? So I never got an MBA. I never got anything beyond a master's in chemistry, a bachelor's in chemistry, but I went to work. And so, long story short, I decided, well, maybe I need to go back and get a master's in organization development. If I'm going to be messing around with people's lives, I should know a little bit more about what I'm doing. So then I got into this master's program. I totally fell in love with being back at school and decided a master's wasn't going to be enough, and I got a PhD. All of that was while the kids were still little and I was still the primary caregiver at home. By then they were in school, I was in school, worked out pretty well. And then what happened was by
Gotcha.
then, huh? What'd you say?
No, I just said, yeah, I got you.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool.
So by then, Andy had become a big time executive in the Valley, and he had a lot of options that hadn't quite vested. And I hadn't finished my PhD. And so we delayed when we made the swap. We didn't make the swap when our youngest was in elementary school. We made the swap when our youngest was in 6th grade. So, we delayed it a little. By the way, in the meantime, when we made the deal, we had frozen our standard of living way back when we got married. Actually, when I quit my job, my original job, and we froze our standard of living so that as he made more and more money, we could bank the differential between what it cost us to live and how much he made, so that when I got back in, I wouldn't have to immediately make what he was already making. Two business people get together, make a life plan like this. We're pretty pragmatic. So we made the swap
That's awesome.
when our youngest was in 6th grade and our oldest was in 8th grade, and uh, and a lot of very interesting things happened at the time, which was, first of all, nobody in Andy's business network could believe we were doing this. In fact, I remember getting a call from the the CEO of the very large Silicon Valley company he worked for at the time, saying, "Okay, Carole, so what's the real story here? Is he dying of cancer? Did he have a nervous breakdown?" Like, nobody could believe he was stepping out at the pinnacle of his career, making the kind of money he was making, to come home and stay home with the kids. And at the same time, everybody kept saying to me, "Are you sure you want to go back to work?" Uh, and it turned out that the swap was harder on me than on him, because he couldn't wait to get out of what he was in. He was so done. And I hadn't ever
Yeah.
really stopped to think about what it was going to like for him to take over my job, because my job was taking care of the kids and taking care of the house, and I had a way of doing my job. I didn't go replace him as a senior VP of marketing at a huge Silicon Valley company, but he replaced me. So I had some pretty specific ideas about how I wanted the job done, and so those were some pretty challenging years for us. Uh, but the long and the short of it is that by then I had gotten my PhD, and I had gone to work as a partner in a consulting firm. First, I started out with my own smaller consulting gig, and then I joined a bigger firm as a partner. And by then, I was, he quit on a Friday, and on Monday, I got on a plane and went to Australia, because I had joined this new consulting firm that was worldwide. And
Wow.
uh, as you might imagine, that was you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't make a swap like that if you were replacing an executive assistant. Can you imagine? Never even occurred to us that we should have some overlap. um, anyway, it was pretty interesting. But so then I had my era as a consultant, and I traveled all over the world, and that was a lot of fun. It was very gratifying. And then when our youngest child was in high school, she got sick. She's fine now and she's great, but she got sick, and I just couldn't be on the other side of the planet. It didn't matter that Andy was home, totally in charge, totally capable of doing everything that needed to be done. I would call home, and she'd be crying, and I'd be like, "Oh my God, I feel like the worst mother on the planet." At the time, one of the members of my dissertation committee had encouraged me to go meet a fellow named David Bradford at Stanford, um, who's the co-author of the book that we've written that's about to come out. David was in charge of a course called Touchy Feely, which lots of people have heard about, and it's actually called Interpersonal Dynamics. And he'd been around the GSB for quite a while, but the course had gotten quite popular. They were teaching 4 sections at the time, and they needed another person to teach. And so Charlie, my mentor at my PhD program, introduced me to David and said, um, "You guys should talk." So I went to see David, and long story short, David said, "I think you'd be really good at teaching this stuff." And so I started by teaching 1/4 of Touchy Feely a year at Stanford, um, kind of on a lark. And then once our daughter got sick and I didn't want to be traveling so much, I decided to take a leave from my consulting firm so that I could be home a little bit more. And at the same time, Stanford had decided they wanted me to do a lot more teaching. So originally, I thought I was just taking a leave from my consulting firm. I was going to teach full time for a couple of years till everything stabilized. Then I'd go back to teaching very part time. Well, then I totally fell in love with my students, and I decided to have my partners buy me out, and I became a full time uh, teacher at Stanford. And during the years I was there, we went from 4 sections of Touchy Feely to 12 sections of Touchy Feely. And one of the things that a lot of people thought I invented Touchy Feely because I became known as the queen of Touchy Feely, but I did not invent it. It was there when I
Yeah.
got there, and I stand on the shoulders of some real greats, including David Bradford. Uh, what I brought was that I was the first person who was teaching it that came from business, from the business world. And so I was able to make a lot more, connect the dots better for the students with regard to why does this matter, and how does this make you a better leader, and how does this make you a more well-rounded human being. um, and so uh, I think that was part of the shift in the popularity of the course, was as students started being able to see how they were going to use it. It was always transformative. Students always, I mean, way before me, they would come out and say, "Oh my God, where's this been all my life?" But what happened was that it got a lot more momentum as they started recognizing what they were going to be able to do with it. Uh, and and
Gotcha.
so that's how I ended up
So,
in academia. By the way,
and
ironically, hang on, at my very first dissertation committee meeting, I sat them down and I said, just to be clear, I want you all to know I am not getting a PhD because I ever intend to teach. So don't make me do all that bullshit that academics care about because I am not going to be an academic. I am too pragmatic for that. So then for 20 years, I got a little note addressed to me, Carole Robin, care of Graduate School of Business, Stanford University, from the chair of my committee, that would always start with, quote, let me be perfectly clear. I am never going to teach.
so you ended up doing something that you never thought you would for 20 years.
Yep.
But first, I want to ask, like, for the audience, what is touchy feely?
Okay. So first of all, touchy feely is the informal, affectionate name that the students call this course called Interpersonal Dynamics. And it's a quarter-long course in which, and you know, you had Jason Tan on your podcast, and you've been talking about T groups. So the main modality of learning in this course is called T groups. The idea is that you don't learn about how to become more interpersonally competent by having me lecture or reading a book or even having discussions about it. You learn to be more interpersonally effective by interacting with other people in real time and having them let you know what it is that you do that is influential, that is distancing, that draws them closer to you, that has them trust you more, trust you less, makes them feel safer, makes them feel less safe, uh, has them wanting to have more relationship with you or less. And the idea is that if you create an environment that feels incredibly artificial, 12 people sitting around a circle with a couple of facilitators and no structure and no agenda. People are like, "What?" But when we create that, what we do is we create a deliberate vacuum. We pull out everything that normally exists when groups of people interact. An agenda, a formal leader, goals. The only goal is to learn about how to be more interpersonally effective. That's the only goal. So everybody looks at each other for a while, and everybody's kind of quiet, and then finally somebody says, "Well, what are we supposed to do?" And they all turn to the facilitator with an expectation that somebody in a differentiated leadership role will tell them what to do. And then the facilitator might say, "What do you want to do?" And then somebody has a reaction to that. "Well, aren't you the leader? Aren't you supposed to tell us?" "Well, I think you might learn more if I don't tell you." "Well, why are you holding out on us?" Not pretty soon, there is an interpersonal exchange occurring. Or another thing that might happen in that vacuum is that one member of the group says, "Okay, well, why don't we all go around and introduce ourselves?" So everybody starts introducing themselves. By the time they get to the sixth person says, "I don't even remember what the first person said, and I'm kind of bored." Things that people would actually probably not say, but we've established a norm around speaking what's going on for you right here, right now. What's going on for you intrapersonally? I'm feeling really awkward. I'm feeling really embarrassed. I'm feeling bored. And what is going on for you interpersonally? Wow, I'm really appreciating the way Justin was willing to take a risk and suggest something. So, out of this vacuum springs this laboratory. The T in T group stands for training and not therapy. And the idea is to co create a laboratory where we can all learn about how to be more interpersonally effective by just engaging with each other. And of
So
course,
it was surprise. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
And what happens is, as in any relationship, and now it's a co-created relationship with a bunch of other people, dip their toe in the water and they might take a few chances and a few risks. And then when those go well, then they're willing to go a little deeper. And when those go well, they go a little deeper. One of the premises of the course, and something we talk a lot about in the book, is what we call the 15% rule. So behaving the way you always behave and doing what you always do is and staying in your comfort zone will not result in learning. However, stepping way outside your comfort zone and doing something you can't ever imagine doing or saying is too terrifying, and you'll just freeze. But there's this zone in the middle, which is where we learn. And the laboratory is meant to create conditions where you can experiment with stepping outside your comfort zone a little bit at a time, i.e., 15%, so that you learn. So maybe I have never been willing to be vulnerable and disclose that I feel kind of insecure about whether or not I even really belong here. Well, I've got a mental model and a set of tapes that say if I say that, people will find me less credible and weak. But now I've got an opportunity to test that assumption. So I might be willing to disclose that to this group. Maybe not on the first day, maybe not in the first week, but maybe by week 4. And then it turns out that people say, "Wow, Carole, I find you a lot easier to relate to after you said that. I thought nothing bothered you. I thought everything was water off a duck's back." So I learned something, uh, and and then I get to apply that learning to the way I show up and interact with others in the group. I think maybe one of my favorite examples of this, it didn't happen in a T group, but it so informed my work. It was an early, um, it was an early harbinger of things to come, which is at the time, and I think I may have shared this in the group you were in, but at the time uh, that this happened, I had risen up the ranks. I was running a $50 million region. I had a bunch of guys that worked for me because at the time I still hadn't been able to convince management to let me hire another woman because they kept saying, "But if you hire a woman, then we'll have a woman working for a woman." And I would say, "Oh, yeah, because we don't have any men working for any men."
Oh my God.
It was like, yeah, I mean, let me tell you, I'm old, but the dinosaurs were not roaming the earth. Anyway, but this was maybe early 80s. And uh, and I had my team at this offsite, and I I had this really cool idea, and I was really getting excited about it. By the way, I had learned there was no place in work for emotions or feelings. I had been well socialized in a very male environment, so I was usually a hard ass, and it served me pretty well early in my career. But we're at this offsite. We've all been working really hard, and I'm really excited about this thing. And I'm trying to get them enthusiastic about it, and I get crickets. And I'm like, "Come on, you guys, can't you see how cool this could be?" Crickets. And I get a little more agitated, and then one of my guys looks at me and he says, "Wait a minute, is that water in the corner of your eye? Are you going to cry?" But then he says, "Are you human after all?" And then I burst out crying. And I said, "You don't think
How
I'm
did that make
fucking..."
you feel?
It was a watershed moment in my life, Justin. I looked at him, I said, "You don't think I'm fucking human? I don't think there's anything more important for us to talk about than that." And I tore up our agenda for the offsite. And I said, "We're going to spend the rest of our time here talking about who we each are, what matters to us, why it matters to us, and what that means for what we want to do with each other and for each other." And that's when we became a team. And to this day, I believe those guys would follow me anywhere. And however, if I'd have burst
So,
out crying 2 years into my job when I was a sales engineer, way down the pecking order, I'm not sure it would have served me.
right. So why was that such an important moment in the development of your team? Because I think that oftentimes people are afraid to bring their vulnerability to work.
Absolutely. It was the reason it was such an important moment, and in retrospect led me to everything I ended up doing at Stanford and why I sit here today and why I wrote this book, is that I held this really strong mental model that you just talked about, which is if I show vulnerability, people will see me as weak. And I had the additional uh, mental model, not unfounded, that as a woman, it was especially important for nobody to see me as weak. So, um, and I gotten very good at it, but in the meantime, nobody saw me as human. And after a while, that wasn't serving me very well. And frankly, I remember I remembered thinking, I'm leaving half of myself in the parking lot every day. When I come to work, I'm leaving half of myself in the parking lot. And it turns out I was leaving the most important half of myself, the half of myself that people could connect to, which by the way is why the book that we've just written is called Connect. Because somehow, somewhere along the way, I'd lost sight of the fact that people do business with people. They don't do business with ideas or machines or money or plans. They actually do business with people. So unless they can figure out how to connect to someone else, I think they're limited in how far they're going to get in their success. They're limited in their success. And that was when I said that part of what I think created this reputation that I had as the queen of touchy feely once I got to the GSB, is that I had stories like that to share, and real
It's
experiences.
like how to bring it back into the business world.
Precisely.
Stories about how to bring it back into the business world.
Right.
And so, what are the things that people get from and take away from touchy feely or from a T group? What are they? Is it? Well, I guess my own experience was that I felt like I was able to test some of those mental models that I had about how I was presenting to people, or and that was really important. Then I felt like I learned, in my going through this program, I learned um, a lot about my own, like a lot of skills, actually, a lot of skills about, how do I talk about my emotions or bring my emotions to work. Is that, are you driving people
Right.
towards,
Right.
even though it's free form, are people being kind of driven by the facilitators towards a specific end state?
Um. Well, let me back up a little bit. Just because T group is the key pedagogical modality we use for learning, it doesn't mean that there's no reading and no class time and no concepts. I mean, it is a course at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford. So there's research that backs it up. There are concepts that are key. There are competencies that you get to practice in these groups. Even in your experience in lit, you learned about the power of self-disclosure, for example. You learned about what 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 results in feedback what results in feedback being effective and not effective, and also how can feedback build relationship instead of weaken relationship. You learned about what happens when there are power differentials in a group and how that affects people's behavior, including your own. Um, you learned about how to connect across differences, um, and uh, and boy, if there's ever been a time when the world needed these skills and competencies, I don't think there's ever been a more important. It's always been important, but my God, I mean, people have just completely lost the capacity to learn how to be curious, how to talk to each other in ways that actually build relationship, how to connect, and I think that's leaving us. And now, then you add the pandemic, you add everything that 2020 brought, politically, racial divide, and then the pandemic, and boy, I don't think we've ever been more disconnected. And I don't think it's ever been more important for us to regain some of the value that we give to investing in connecting with others and learning how to do it well. I don't know if I answered your
Yeah,
question
I
about touchy
felt
feely.
that in no, that's perfect. That's perfect. I want to talk a little bit about my own experience with
Yeah.
it because it was so impactful for me. I felt, and I think this was pretty standard. It seemed like many people in both my T group experience, but then other people in the previous programs or future programs also
Yep.
had a really impactful experience. And when I came back, I was so impacted. I felt, I shared it with lots of people. I recommended a ton of people. My brother Dan went through the program as well,
Yep.
so I'm very thankful for that. But for the audience, kind of listening, for me, it was this kind of window into all these skills that I had not even known existed, or behaviors that I had been unconscious behaviors that I'd been doing my whole life that I hadn't really realized. And so it was a very eye-opening experience to kind of, I guess, lower the waterline, as you guys say, to see more of what was going on, and
Yep.
like maybe increase my level of consciousness about my own behavior. And some of the
Yeah.
big takeaways
Yeah.
for me were, you know, one was just the skill set of being able to talk about my emotional experience and like having practice of,
Sure.
I feel angry right now, or I feel irritated, or I feel sad, and being able to name that, as opposed to, previously my coping mechanism for feeling difficult emotions was to run away from them. So the ability to just sit with
Right.
it and to talk about it, which is its own form of catharsis, was really big for me. And then another big takeaway, which
Mm-hmm.
was both during the weekend, but that we did it, but also came afterwards in the uh, peer groups that we did, was, one thing for me was to really understand that I had this unconscious behavior needing to put myself in positions of power relative to other people in interpersonal situations. And I would do it
Yeah.
as a, it was like a learned behavior from when I was younger, but I would, bring up, oh, I've been successful in these ways. I'd like figure out secret ways to work it in the conversation, kind of like, oh, I've
Yeah.
founded this big company, or I'm, I'm into meditation, and I'm in this spiritual path, or whatever, anything. I could use like anything interesting or successful or whatever facts to kind of put myself in that position. And it was so funny realizing it and having other people just point it out in very blunt terms, like, I can tell like you're doing this behavior, and I just want to put that out there. And to be called out on
Yeah.
it and realize it was such an eye-opening experience for me. um,
Yeah.
so I
You know, a lot of people report their experience as, and all the emails that we get from alums and calls, and what they say is, this course helped me learn how to be a better human being. It helped me learn how to deepen my friendships, how to be more a closer to how to get closer to the people in my life who I wanted to be closer to, but didn't quite know how to get close to. It helped me. It I've had many emails from people saying this saved my marriage 10 years later, um, which is pretty
Yeah,
unusual for a course that you take in a business school. In addition to wow, I think I owe all of my promotions in my professional career to the fact that I actually learned that people do business with people. So the reason that it's had so much impact and it's so well known, and a lot of people use words like life changing and transformational, is that, as you just pointed out, once you learn how to learn, once you learn how to learn about yourself and how to learn about what's going on between you and someone else, then you continue to have that capacity forever. It sounds abstract, but learning how to learn about interpersonal dynamics is the goal. But unless you've been through it, it
yeah,
sounds a little like, what? What the heck does that even mean?
yeah. It's interesting because when I first heard about it, it was from Jason, and he said, "Oh, you should do this course." It was the most impactful thing I've done this last year, and I was like, "Okay, I'll do it just based on your recommendation." I'm someone who dives
Yeah.
in. I'll try anything
Yeah.
once, and so, but I didn't really get it. It was, he was saying, "Oh, you just kind of sit in a circle with strangers for what's like 30 something hours of time, right, over this long weekend." And I was like, "Oh, what happens?" I think it's very hard to explain how that is a transformational process, and it's one of
It
those things
is. You know what it
you have to
is?
do it.
Exactly. Justin, it's like trying to explain skiing and how exhilarating it is to somebody who has never seen snow, has never seen skis, has it's like, well, there's this cold stuff that's slippery and you put these things on and then you slide. And by the way, they don't even know what sliding is. So how do you explain it? So it's one of those things that you just have to do. Uh, and I think the power, another thing that I want to make sure I underscore is that the power of the course also lies in what happens when these students and participants discover what happens when they allow themselves to be more fully known. Most of the time, especially in the valley, we we spin images and we hide behind facades and we're always crushing it. And there is something profound that happens when somebody decides to take the chance of dropping the facade and allowing someone else to really see them. And talk about a major shift. It's like, boy, I thought that if you really saw me, you'd think I was an imposter and you'd think less of me. And it turns out you like me a whole lot more and would be more likely to follow me. Imagine that.
So that's been my own experience for sure, is that as I have become more vulnerable with the people around me, but also publicly in talks or on social media or whatever,
Yeah.
the response has been much more,
Well, look at your
it has attracted
podcast.
people instead of, yeah, yeah, instead of repelling people as I thought it would. And I had this mental model that people would think I wasn't successful or wasn't worth getting to know or whatever. Actually, it's the opposite, right? People are attracted to that authenticity and vulnerability. Um, you know, so you taught
Because
this class for a
they're
long time.
seeing the human, because there's hang on, because they're seeing the human in you, Justin. That's why.
Yeah, yeah. And we want to have
Go ahead.
relationships
You
with
started to ask a
authentic,
question.
other real. Yeah, I was just going to say one note on that. It's like
Precise.
we want to have relationships with authentic people. And so my question is, how does somebody actually go about if they want to do a T group? Not everyone's in Stanford GSB, and then you started this other program, Leaders in Tech, to kind of bring this training program to technologies founders and executives. But that's a very small group of people. How does someone go and have this experience if they aren't in that set of people?
So, so there are a number of ways in which people can have a T group experience. And you're now speaking to how my co author David and I, got talked into writing this book. So, for years, we had been approached about writing a book about Touchy Feely. And we kept saying, you're not going to learn about this in a book. No way. We're not writing a book. You actually have to go do it, as we've been talking about. And the very, very smart editor at Random House who approached us said, what you just said. So let's see. The only people who get to learn these competencies and skills and have the benefit of this life changing experience are the people who are privileged enough to get into the Stanford Business School, or lucky and privileged enough to get into your or some of these other programs. How are you okay with that? And that's how he got us. So David and I sat down and looked at each other and said, maybe it's time for us to really, really think about whether there's a way to bring this to a much larger group of people than who we can reach through individual T groups. And 4 years later, that's how long we were at it. Um, so I've said that writing a book was like being pregnant for 3.5 years, in labor for 6 months, and now we have a baby and we have no idea what to do with it. um, but the what we what we landed on that I'm really excited about, and I'm almost a little bit nervous and afraid to be excited by, because I hope it turns out to be true. Uh, I think so, but I won't know until the book is out there. Um, is we landed on a way to bring the lessons of Touchy Feely to a reader by uh, so it's not an academic book. It's a book that conveys all of the lessons through 5 storylines. uh, Two colleagues, a man and a woman at work, a father and a daughter, two buddies, two women that have been friends since they were in college, uh, um, a married couple. And so the concepts are brought to light in the stories of these relationships, which are an amalgamation of relationships that we've known or been in. They're no one. It's no one particular person. And then I think what's even the coup de grace is that at the end of each chapter, after you've read, why self disclosure is so powerful, and you see what happened when these two people decided to take a bit more risk and share more with each other, then we have a section called Deepen Your Learning. And then we ask you, the reader, so if you had been uh, Elena, what do you think you would have done when, uh, Sanjay said blah, blah? Now, stop and think about what is there for you to learn about that when you think about, oh, I would have probably done X or Y. So what we're essentially doing is we're guiding through them through the process of self-reflection that participants in groups, are can't help but have happen, uh, because they're living it. And then we say, okay, now pick a person in your life that you'd actually like to feel closer to and have a deeper relationship with. How is what you've learned about disclosure, going to inform what you want to do next? Now go do it. Now stop and think about what you learned from the doing. So and in fact, what we ask the reader at the very beginning is read a chapter, go do what we tell you to do, reread the chapter, and then go on to the next chapter. Now, we don't know whether people will be willing to invest that, but essentially what we're doing is we're delivering Touchy Feely one chapter at a time. And in fact, that's what chapter two
Gotcha.
is called. Chapter two is called A World Class Course, one chapter at a time.
And so it's 5 chapters that kind of cover all of the different skill sets
No,
or
no, no.
learnings,
No, no,
or
no.
maybe the
It's
major
16.
ones.
It's 16 chapters. um,
Okay.
because you follow the 5 relationships, but you also follow the 5 relationships over the arc of a relationship. There are different stages of their relationship in different parts of the book, and and so
Gotcha.
different, and so there are different skills and competencies required at different steps, at different stages, and how to use them. By the way, there's a big section on conflict and how conflict can actually strengthen and deepen a relationship rather than running away from it. You learn a whole bunch about each other. You know, the essence of the book, I mean, the book is called Connect, Building Exceptional Relationships with Family, Friends, and Colleagues. But, you know, the book is in 2 parts, and part one, and with the metaphor we use is, imagine climbing a mount. David was a big climber as a young man. He used to climb Mount Washington, and there was a tough climb to what they called the upper meadow. And then there was an even tougher climb to the summit. So the first part one, is just how to get to the upper meadow. How do you get to a place where your relationships are robust and functional and they feel solid and good? And when most people don't even know how to get to the upper meadow. And then
Right.
part two is, so there might be a few that you actually want to make the even steeper, even trickier climb all the way to exceptional. And here's what that's going to take. And we define exceptional as a relationship where you can both be vulnerable and fully yourselves, just for starters, where you can be honest with each other and nobody will use whatever you said against you, where you can both be and remain committed to each other's growth and learning and development. Uh, and and the idea is that you can have some of that with some people, where it's a relationship where you deal with conflict productively, as I just said. So you can have some pieces of this, but when you have all of those with a person, then you're on to something that we call exceptional. And it takes a lot of work. And we're not saying every relationship in your life should be exceptional.
So there's some basic skill sets to get to the upper meadow, to get to like a
Exactly.
kind of baseline good relationships, and
Exactly.
then there you have a guide to getting to building exceptional relationships.
That's correct.
What
And
are some of the
wait, but hang on.
sorry? What? Yeah, go ahead.
If you think about your own T group experience, I bet you could identify some of the stuff that takes to get to the upper meadow and what it might take to get all the way to the summit. You in your I mean, you probably never thought
Right.
about that, but you're already equipped with a fair amount of that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm thinking about it right now, and I think getting to the upper meadow, it's probably showing vulnerability and talking about your emotional state as opposed to just the facts and circumstances of what's going on, right? It's like being going deeper in the
Exactly.
conversation, um, and probably there's some component of just spending time with the person too. Um, but then for the
Or
pardon me,
I think there could be a little fallacy in the spending time because it's what you do with the time you're spending,
yeah,
right? How much are you really letting each other in? How real are you being with each other? If you and I are very real with each other for half an hour, that will advance our relationship much farther than if we spend 3 days together on a camping trip and never talk about what's really going on for us.
yeah, that's true. There's this element of this, from the T group, my T group experience, where some of those people I'm, you know, very good friends. I joined the board of one of their companies. I'm like pretty good friends with. Like and we only spent an hour or sorry, one weekend together. And so
Exactly.
it was an example of forging some incredible relationships off of like a very relatively small amount of time. Um,
Right.
so what are the hallmarks of building an exceptional relationship, or what are the ways that people build an exceptional relationship?
Well, when you go back to, you need a combination of all these things in order for it to be exceptional, of all the things that I just talked about. So you need to deal with conflict productively. And by the way, that means you have to take the risk of sometimes saying things without knowing what's actually going to happen. Like if I tell you that something that you've been doing is really bugging me, uh, and initially that's going to create friction for us, and you might feel crappy. I have to be willing and invested enough in our relationship and committed enough to your growth and our relationship to tell you, and to say, and to be very clear that I'm telling you because I think you doing X or Y is harming us. Now, there's a version of that that you need to get to the meadow, but there's more, uh, an even more courage needed to get to the summit. Precisely because once you get to the meadow, sometimes you think, it's pretty nice here. The sun is warm. There's nice flowers in the meadow. It's pretty here. I don't know. That summit's looking You know, the 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 hike to the summit is very uncertain. It starts out looking all clear, and then clouds come over the summit. And then you have to stop, and you don't know if you're going to make it to the top. And you think, why did we ever leave the meadow? But the fact is that um, it isn't necessarily a whole new set of competencies and skills, but it is using them in even more profound ways to build connection.
How do you, when you're connecting across differences? I mean, that's something that we talked about and is a really difficult thing for people to do today. I think that everybody seems to be on the internet, getting triggered by the people who don't believe what they believe,
Yep.
and then spewing
Yep.
like equally
Vitriol.
triggering things, vitriol back to the other people. Like, how do people keep them, or like what are the tool sets for people to keep themselves open to connecting with other people across differences? I feel like if you suggested that idea even to people who are currently in their triggered states online, they'd say, like, I don't even want to connect with those people. Like, why should I even? They believe something so toxic. I don't want to connect with them.
I think that you're talking about something that's really challenging and important, which is this work, whether it's doing a tea group, taking Touchy Feely, reading this book, requires a learner's mindset. If you don't want to learn, then this really isn't for you. We were initially very concerned about people seeing this 7 easy steps to being more interpersonally competent. They don't exist. And there is no such thing as instant intimacy. And there is no such thing as instant connecting across a huge difference. So you have to start with a desire to learn something. When I encounter somebody who believes something that I could not imagine to be more egregious, the first thing I do is I get curious. I think, wow, I wonder how you came to that conclusion. I wonder how your life is served by believing in that as strongly as you do. I wonder what I'm missing in not believing that. I wonder if I come across to others the way you're coming across to be. I wonder if there's something that we could do so that we could actually both see each other as human beings who perhaps have a bunch of pretty core needs that are not that different. Maybe we both want to be loved. Maybe we both really care about the future of our children. Maybe we both feel like we've gotten the wrong end of the stick. And so, could we start with feelings, by the way? Maybe we both feel afraid. Maybe we both feel sad. Maybe we both feel abandoned. Can we start with, wow, what if the two of us could come up with a way for neither one of us to feel that way? Maybe not your way, maybe not my way. See, that's the problem. That's the problem with discourse today. It's very, very divisive. You either believe this or you believe this. I often, I have an executive coaching practice, which, by the way, is closed. I can't take on any more clients, especially right now. But I often tell my clients, imagine a triangle where at this end of the triangle is me, and at this end of the triangle is you along the base. And at the top is a goal that we share. Not feeling so crappy could be a really great goal. Not feeling taken advantage of could be a really great goal. Now, you believe the way to get there is this way. I believe the way to get there is this way. Unless we allow for the possibility that neither of those ways is the only way, unless we allow for the possibility that there is some interim way between the base and the ape and the top, we will never have a conversation that creates relationship, much less a solution.
I, I yeah, and I love that whole thought process because curiosity and cultivating that curiosity, curious mindset when you come across something that may be triggering has been a huge growth path for me. I used to be a very reactive person. I probably still am in many ways a very reactive person, but
Yep.
I have been able to cultivate a short circuit, right, of like getting curious about something that normally maybe I'd be offended by. Like someone says something to me on a text message that my first reaction is like, oh, this person's wrong or they're attacking me or whatever. I've been able to start saying, oh, I wonder why they're saying that. What's the motivation behind that
Right.
question? What is their incentive? Who are like what about them makes them ask that question? And am I reading it even in the right way? Or, starting to ask questions about it. How do
Right.
people
Right.
cultivate
And here,
curiosity?
and wait, and here's, hang on.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, that's what I was just going to say. And here is where I think mindfulness is such an important element of being interpersonally effective. You know, uh, Joe Greenstein used to say that we should have called the course Interpersonal Mindfulness, because the more in touch you are with what is going on for you and how you're reacting, the more you can manage those reactions long enough to be curious about what's going on for the other person. So, that famous Viktor Frankl quote, between stimulus and response there's a space, and in that space lies
Yeah.
our choice, right? So, a lot of effective interpersonal dynamics and a lot of building relationships is about paying attention, noticing, which means you have to pay attention, and then being deliberate with the choices that you make in the interactions that you have, which a lot of people, that's another thing you learn in T group. Oh, I didn't even realize I did that, right? You didn't even realize there was a choice, much less that you'd made one.
Right.
Years ago, I used to have a
Yeah. Most
colleague.
of the time we're going. Go ahead.
No, finish your statement. Most of the time, we're going.
Most of the time we are going through life being triggered by one thing or another and without even being conscious of it. Something is where we run out of gas or something, and then we're just like, "Fuck, this is," I'm pissed off, and you don't even think about like, "Oh, I'm having an angry moment, or I am experiencing
Yeah.
anger in my body." You're just angry, and you're swept along until you go to the next moment. Maybe that wears off, and then something happens, and you feel happy about it. Another thing happens, and you feel sad about it. Most of us are very unconscious about our experience. So, one thing that's worked really well
Yep.
for me has been to build up my meditation practice to become more conscious of my experience, whatever it is, emotional or physical or
Yep.
anything else. What are the other ways that how do people develop that space between stimulus and response?
This is where something like the lessons of the course or T group or the book really help. You ask other people to help you. If you're not noticing, and you've got a relationship with somebody who's invested in you, they'll say, "So Justin, I don't know what's going on for you right now, but your voice just went up and you got a little uh, you know, curt, and what's going on? What are you feeling right now?" And then if you didn't notice you were angry, you get to say, "Oh, you know what? I'm pissed." So, one of the beauties of developing relationships like we're talking about is you don't, all the burden of being on top of what's going on for you is not entirely on you all the time.
That's that's so funny you said that because after my T group experience, I actually immediately, which is really stupid of me, but I had planned an executive team retreat for my company.
Even though
And
we
so I
told
went
you not to
immediately
do
then.
that.
I didn't read, I'm not very good at reading emails
Yeah.
and like following directions. And so I immediately the next day went to this team retreat. And, during and we was facilitated, I had someone doing my coach, Matt Mashari, was there. And so we were doing feedback, like live feedback with me. And one of I was like, oh, I can do this feedback live. I'm totally fine with it. I've just been through this big experience, like where I got a lot of feedback, so I'm going to be fine with it. And I remember people like he was reading out the feedback, and then somebody, one of my executive team was saying, oh, I think this might be, it was maybe about the way I treated people at the company, and it was negative feedback. Right? It was like Justin treats people like,
Yeah.
he just uses them,
By the
and
way, I
then
never use the word negative. Hang on.
it was
Hang on.
difficult
Interruption.
feedback.
I never use the word negative.
Yes,
Challenging, difficult, not
it
negative.
was.
All
It was
feedback is data, never negative.
That's
Go
right.
ahead.
It was difficult. It was difficult feedback about me being, using people and just not caring about them, and I felt it was very unfair. Right? I felt like it was outrageous, right? Because it was
Wait, 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 wait,
I
wait.
felt I felt
Those are not
outraged.
feelings.
Well, outrage is a
Okay,
feeling.
that's a
I
feeling.
felt I felt I felt
Yes.
outraged, but I didn't know it. I was like, I can accept this. I'm just accepting this feedback. And my coach actually called me out at that moment. He was like, stop, it's not safe to give Justin feedback right now, he's very angry. And I was like, no, I'm not angry. I'm not angry. And you could see in my face, my jaw's tense, my body's tense, my amygdala's firing, and I was very upset because I felt that I was being treated unfairly. And at that moment, it was interesting because that moment really changed the course of our retreat, because then he was like, okay, we need to take a break and you need to go outside and run or do some jumping jacks or something to work out your anger. So like, because you're very upset right now and you're not in a place where you can get feedback and other people are afraid of you. And of course I was like, that's stupid. I'm not gonna do that. I'm not angry. That's stupid. I don't like, it's silly. And then he took off running actually down the driveway of this hotel. And he was like, you can't catch me, motherfucker. And I'm like, what? Like, he's, 15 years older than me at least. And so I'm like, no way.
Yeah.
And I sprint after him. And then halfway down the driveway, he starts
Yeah.
yelling at the top of his lungs, like, ah. And he's like, Justin, you got to just yell it out. And so I'm running after him, yelling. And then by the end of it, I'd worked out this energy and been able to release uh, my, come from my current tense emotional state and go back into them and actually hear feedback. But the interesting thing was it was a short circuit, like him being there and being able to give me feedback in real time and feeling comfortable with that, and being able to say to someone's face, like, no, you're angry and you're not able to control yourself right now. That was a big moment that changed the trajectory of that event.
Probably said something that made you pause enough to recognize you were feeling something, and it was big enough that you stopped in your tracks. Whatever he said just made you stop.
Yeah, I think he said something that was like, you seem very angry and
Right.
we should take a break.
Yes.
Like, and then I was like, no, I'm not angry and we don't need to take a break. And he was like, I strongly suggest that we take a
Right.
break. I think there
Right.
was something along those lines.
Right. Now, if he had wanted to put himself in that, as we talk about in T group, he could have said, I'm feeling nervous about what's going on here. I'm afraid that you're not fully in touch with some anger you may be feeling. And I don't know what will happen if we don't take a break. So so there's something about, as a facilitator, he may not have had a need to do that. And I'm not saying he did. But I am saying that the more one puts oneself in whatever they're saying, whether it's advice or counsel or questions, the better, the stronger the relationship will get. So, Justin, I'm worried
Yeah.
about you right now. If I was on the receiving of the on end of this, I would be incredibly pissed. How are you doing with it? Might have been a very different way to go. And
Yeah.
that might be and
I I
that
feel
might be a way that one of your direct reports might more easily go.
right. Yes, they were not comfortable being able to say, at that point, being able to give me that direct feedback. To Matt's credit, he probably did say something like that because he's very in touch with the language
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
uh, conscious leadership and being in touch with his emotions and just naming his own emotional experience and not assuming
Sure.
about other people.
Yeah.
I just want to,
Yeah. No, no, that's
but
good. No, but I think it's a great way to clarify. First of all, I think it's a great way to remember that what you hear is not necessarily what someone else has said.
yes.
Which is another big lesson in touchy feely, right? There's the whole, you encode something based on your life experience and how you see the world, and then I decode it through my own set of filters, and then until I say, so what I heard you say is, you think I'm angry. I don't know what you really said, right? Um,
Um, cool. So when is the book going to come out?
February 9 is will be in bookstores, obviously a little bit before that, but February 9 is the date that books will be start to be delivered to people who've pre-ordered them, and it's the day that you'll be able to go to a store and buy it. To the extent that anybody will be going to stores at that point. And we'll have a website up in another few weeks um, for pre-orders, and also we're we're inviting. Well, I'll speak for both of us. We're inviting people that we know, CEOs, founders, managers who want to have like a fireside chat with one of us, and wants to, do a bulk pre-order of a certain number of books. We're super interested in doing that. You know, for I don't care that much about how many books are sold because I don't really care about how much money I make here. But what I really care about is how many people read and use this book. Because I honestly think that it could make such a huge difference to, it would move the needle on so many broken conversations and broken relationships. Do you know that there was a time when, uh, when Republicans and Democrats had the same cafeteria? They actually all ate at the same cafeteria. Do you know that they do not do that anymore? They can't even sit. They used to go to each other's homes. They used to have friendships. Their families used to get together. Like there was always a big
Like
uh
legislators?
yeah, yeah, congressmen, senators,
Like,
and
yeah.
and representatives in Washington D.C. They had relationships. They might have had big ideological differences, but they had relationships. And honestly, I'm distressed at, and that's just one example of the extent to which the foundation of a relationship as the building block for problem solving has been eroded. The other thing that I'm distressed by, well, no, I'll reframe that. I'll reframe that in terms of, and you heard me tell this story about starfish throwers, but you know, I've I've never I've never given a course or ended a you know a year at all the years I was at the GSB and gave a last lecture. I've always told the story of the starfish thrower because I learned about it when I was doing my PhD. I don't know who wrote this. It has been a guiding principle for, I don't know, 30 years now for me, which is, it's the story of a burned out executive who goes away for a weekend and is walking the beach, one Saturday morning in wee hours of the morning, sees a distant figure that looks like it's dancing and is intrigued. So she walks towards this figure. And then as she does, she notices it's an old man. And what he's doing is he's leaning down and picking up a starfish and throwing it in the water. And she's been doing that so rhythmically. I mean, the old man has been doing that so rhythmically that it looked like he was dancing from far away. So then she stops and she looks up and down the beach, and there are thousands and thousands of starfish on the beach. And she says to him, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" And he says, "What does it look like I'm doing? The tide came up, deposited all these starfish on the beach. The sun is coming up. They're all going to fry. I'm throwing them back in the water. And she says, "What are you, nuts? There are tens of thousands of, maybe hundreds of thousands of starfish on this beach. What difference could you possibly make?" And he leans down and he picks up a starfish and he throws it in the water and he says, "I made a difference to that one, didn't I?" And the day I read that story, I knew I was put on the planet to be a starfish thrower. But then, as my career unfolded, it became clearer and clearer to me that what I wanted to do was build an army of starfish throwers. And so, the addition to the story that I added was that she then goes and joins him, and then more people join them, and then pretty soon you have an army of starfish throwers. And my greatest hope is that the book will help throw hundreds of thousands of starfish, maybe millions of starfish, back in the water.
That's a beautiful story. I love that story.